There exists, I have observed, a particular quality to those evenings when fate conspires to gather the threads of human drama into a single, inescapable knot. The air itself seems to thicken with anticipation, and even the most innocent gathering takes on an electric tension that speaks to something deeper than mere social pleasantry. Such was the atmosphere that pervaded Renfield House on that crisp October evening, when Lady Isabel Renfield chose to display what would soon become known as the last bracelet of the Duchess of Florence. The great mansion in Belgrave Square had been transformed for the occasion into a glittering showcase worthy of the legendary artifact it was to house. White lilies and myrtle adorned the sweeping staircase, their perfume mingling with the subtle scents of expensive French cologne and the faint mustiness that clings to old wealth. The marble floors reflected the light of crystal chandeliers like captured starlight, and the carefully selected guests moved through the reception rooms with the practiced grace of those accustomed to such refined gatherings. I had been brought to this assembly by my old acquaintance Lionel Vesey, a dealer in objects of art and antiquity whose reputation for discretion was matched only by his eye for exceptional pieces. Vesey was a man of nervous energy, perpetually smoothing his sleek hair and adjusting his rather daring choice of necktie. His eyes, quick and calculating beneath heavy lids, missed nothing of value in any room he entered. "You must see it, Hastings," he confided as we ascended the marble steps, his voice tight with barely contained excitement. "The bracelet is absolutely extraordinary. 7 sapphires, each representing one of the hills of Rome, set in Renaissance goldwork that would make Cellini weep with envy. The last Duchess of Florence wore it to her final court appearance before the fall of the monarchy. The romance of it, the tragedy, it will command a price that will set the auction houses ablaze." The centerpiece of the evening's display stood in the ballroom upon a specially constructed dais draped in midnight blue velvet. Beneath a bell-shaped dome of crystal glass, the bracelet lay like a captured constellation, 7 sapphires of extraordinary depth and clarity, each stone perfectly matched and set within an intricate web of white gold that seemed to flow like liquid starlight. The craftsmanship was indeed breathtaking, representing the pinnacle of late Victorian Italian artistry, when the great jewelry houses of Florence still commanded the patronage of European royalty. Lady Isabel Renfield herself presided over the gathering with the poise of a woman born to such occasions. Tall and elegant, with pearls at her throat that caught the light with each graceful movement, she possessed that particular beauty that comes from generations of careful breeding and unlimited access to the finest things in life. Yet I detected beneath her, composed exterior, a certain tension, a tightness around her eyes that suggested the financial pressures that had driven her to consider parting with such a treasure. "The provenance is absolutely unquestionable," she was explaining to a small circle of admirers. "Purchased by my late husband's grandfather at the estate sale following the Duchess's death in exile. It has remained in our family vault for over 60 years, waiting for the right moment to emerge into the light once more." Among her audience stood several figures whose presence would soon prove significant to the evening's dramatic conclusion. Mrs. Dorothy Bloom, an American collector whose enthusiasm for European antiquities was matched only by her considerable financial resources, examined the piece with the practiced eye of a serious connoisseur. Her laughter, bright as cut crystal, rang out frequently as she regaled nearby guests with tales of her latest acquisitions. Captain Alan March of the Derbyshire Regiment cut a striking figure in his evening dress, his lean frame and aristocratic features drawing admiring glances from several of the younger ladies present. Yet there was something restless in his manner, a tension that suggested financial pressures of his own. He smoked with the nervous intensity of a man whose debts exceeded his expectations, and his eyes returned repeatedly to the display case with an expression I could not quite decipher. Near the windows stood Dr. Felix Moretti, the Italian art historian who had been engaged to authenticate the piece and oversee its presentation. A man of distinguished bearing with iron-grey hair and the precise manner of a scholar, he observed the proceedings with the detached air of one more comfortable with ancient artifacts than living society. His dark eyes held a watchfulness that suggested depths of knowledge and perhaps secrets that extended far beyond mere academic expertise. The evening's most intriguing guest was undoubtedly Contessa Bianca Ricci, whose pale gold hair and tea-colored eyes lent her an ethereal beauty that seemed to belong more to the Renaissance courts than to modern London drawing-rooms. She wore the palest yellow gloves and carried an ivory fan that remained perpetually closed, her slender fingers tracing its edges with unconscious nervousness. There had been whispers in the newspapers about her family's claim to certain Florentine treasures, old grievances that lawyers and diplomats had temporarily smoothed but never fully resolved. Miss Celia Armitage, Lady Isabel's companion and secretary, moved efficiently through the crowd, ensuring that every detail of the evening proceeded flawlessly. A woman of middle years with pleasant, unremarkable features, she wore grey silk and a string of coral beads that did little to flatter her complexion. Yet her eyes were sharp with intelligence, and I noticed how she seemed to catalogue every guest, every movement, every word, with the precision of a well-trained observer as the evening progressed toward the moment of revelation, when the glass dome would be lifted and the guests permitted a closer examination of the treasure. The atmosphere grew increasingly charged. The ormolu clock upon the mantelpiece chimed the half-hour past 8, and Lady Isabel moved gracefully toward the display case, a small silver key gleaming in her gloved hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly hushed ballroom, "if you would be so kind as to gather round, we shall now unveil the last bracelet of the Duchess of Florence for your closer inspection." The butler, Graves, a man whose discretion was legendary and whose age seemed fixed at some indeterminate point between 40 and 60, approached with a leather tray bearing a second key. The security arrangements, Vesey had explained to me earlier, required 2 keys to open the specially designed case, one held by Lady Isabel and the other by Graves himself. As the guests formed a semicircle around the dais, I observed the subtle interplay of expressions and gestures that would later prove so significant. Captain March's hand trembled slightly as he raised his cigarette to his lips. Mrs. Bloom's eyes sparkled with anticipation, her checkbook no doubt ready for the evening's philanthropic competition. Dr. Moretti stood rigidly at attention, his scholarly demeanor masking what I would later recognize as profound unease. The Contessa's fan fluttered almost imperceptibly, the only sign of emotion in her otherwise perfectly composed features. Lady Isabel inserted her key into the lock with ceremonial precision. The soft click seemed to echo through the suddenly silent room. Graves, with the practiced movements of years of service, activated some hidden mechanism at the base of the case. The crystal dome, which had seemed so solid and secure, lifted as easily as morning mist. The gasp that arose from the assembled guests was like the collective intake of breath before a scream. Where the magnificent bracelet had lain in all its sapphire and gold glory, there remained only the dark impression it had left upon the velvet cushion, a perfect outline that seemed to mock the very concept of security and certainty. The last bracelet of the Duchess of Florence had vanished as completely as if it had never existed at all. Lady Isabel's face drained of all color, her composure cracking like ice under sudden pressure. The key fell from her nerveless fingers to ring against the marble floor with a sound like a death knell. Around the room, the carefully maintained facades of polite society began to crumble as the implications of what had occurred settled upon the assembled company. "Impossible," whispered Dr. Moretti, his scholarly precision abandoned in the face of the inexplicable. "I examined the case myself not 20 minutes ago. The bracelet was secure, the mechanisms intact." "The doors," commanded Lady Isabel, her voice recovering some measure of authority despite her obvious shock. "Graves, seal the house. No one enters or leaves until this matter is resolved." As the great doors of Renfield House closed with the finality of a tomb, trapping the guilty with the innocent, I found myself wishing desperately that my friend Hercule Poirot were present to witness this most perplexing of mysteries. For here, in this glittering assembly of London's finest, a master criminal had struck with such audacity and skill that the very impossibility of the crime seemed to mock our understanding of what was real and what was merely illusion. The hunt for the truth was about to begin, and I suspected that before it was concluded, more than one carefully guarded secret would be dragged into the merciless light of exposure. The transformation of Renfield House from glittering showcase to sealed fortress occurred with the swift efficiency that only generations of well-trained service could provide. Within minutes of Lady Isabel's command, Graves had dispatched footmen to every exit, the great front doors were bolted, and the telephone exchange had been contacted. The guests, so recently admiring the magnificent bracelet, now found themselves prisoners of circumstance, trapped within walls that had witnessed centuries of secrets, but never quite so dramatic a revelation as this. The Blue Salon became our temporary prison. Lady Isabel, displaying the steel beneath her aristocratic composure, directed us into the elegant chamber with its pale blue silk walls and delicate French landscapes. The room, designed for intimate conversation and refined leisure, now served as an interrogation chamber where polite society's veneer began to crack under the pressure of mutual suspicion. Mrs. Dorothy Bloom was the first to give voice to what we all were thinking. "My dear Lady Isabel," she declared, her American directness cutting through the stunned silence, "someone in this very room has made off with that bracelet. It didn't simply vanish into the ether like some magician's trick." Her eyes, bright with a mixture of excitement and accusation, swept the assembled company with the calculating gaze of a woman accustomed to evaluating both people and their possessions. Captain March drew himself to his full military height, his face flushing with indignation. "I say, Mrs. Bloom, surely you don't mean to suggest that any of Lady Isabel's personal guests could be responsible for such a despicable act? We are not common criminals to be subjected to base suspicion." Yet even as he spoke, his hand trembled slightly as he raised his cigarette, and I noticed how his eyes avoided direct contact with his fellow guests. Dr. Moretti, his scholarly composure cracking, began pacing near the mantelpiece with agitated steps. The security was absolute, he muttered, more to himself than to the company. Double locks, pressure-sensitive mechanisms, constant observation. To remove that bracelet would require either intimate knowledge of the system or— He paused, his dark eyes suddenly sharp with suspicion, or the cooperation of someone with authorized access. The implication hung in the air like smoke from Captain March's cigarette. Contessa Bianca Ricci, who had remained silent in her chair by the window, finally spoke, her voice carrying the musical cadence of her Italian heritage. "In Florence, Dr. Moretti, we have learned that the most secure treasures are often taken not by strangers, but by those who know them best. Perhaps this bracelet has simply returned to where it belongs." Her pale eyes met Lady Isabel's with a challenge that spoke to generations of disputed ownership. Miss Celia Armitage, ever the efficient secretary, had positioned herself at a small writing desk and was methodically recording details with the precision of a court stenographer. "If I may suggest," she said in her quiet, authoritative voice, "we should establish exactly where each person was during the critical period. The bracelet was confirmed present at 7:15 by Dr. Moretti and discovered missing at 8:30. That gives us a window of little more than an hour." It was at this moment of rising tension that salvation arrived in an unexpected form. The sound of motor cars in the square announced the arrival of the Metropolitan Police, and shortly thereafter, Graves appeared in the doorway with news that would transform our predicament from mere scandal into genuine investigation. "Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard has arrived, my lady," Graves announced with his customary unflappable dignity. "He is accompanied by a gentleman who wishes to be introduced as Monsieur Hercule Poirot." The name sent a ripple of recognition through the assembled company. Even in these rarefied circles, the reputation of the little Belgian detective had penetrated, bringing with it both hope for resolution and fear of exposure. Lady Isabel's relief was palpable as she granted permission for their entry. Hercule Poirot entered the blue salon like a small, perfectly groomed whirlwind of controlled energy. His compact figure was immaculately dressed in evening clothes that fit his frame to mathematical precision, his dark hair gleaming with pomade, and his magnificent mustaches waxed to points that could have served as compass needles. His green eyes surveyed the scene with the keen intelligence of a master craftsman examining a particularly intricate puzzle. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," he exclaimed upon spotting me, his face lighting with genuine pleasure. "What an unexpected delight to find you present at such a fascinating affair." When Chief Inspector Japp received the call, I could not resist the opportunity to observe what promises to be a most instructive case in criminal psychology. Chief Inspector Japp, a sturdy man with the weary expression of someone who had seen too much of human nature's darker aspects, nodded grimly to the assembled company. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid this is now a police matter. No one leaves until we've got to the bottom of this business." Lady Isabel stepped forward with renewed composure. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. If you can assist in recovering my bracelet, I should be eternally grateful. The piece represents not merely its monetary value, but centuries of family history." Poirot inclined his head with courtly precision. "Madame, I'm entirely at your service. But first, if you would permit, I should like to examine the scene of this most remarkable disappearance. The little gray cells, they require data before they can begin their work of reconstruction." With characteristic thoroughness, Poirot approached the empty display case. His movements were deliberate and methodical as he produced a small magnifying glass from his waistcoat pocket and began a minute examination of the velvet interior, the locking mechanisms, and the crystal dome itself. The assembled guests watched in fascination as he traced patterns invisible to their eyes, occasionally making soft sounds of interest or disapproval. "Most curious," he murmured, more to himself than to his audience. "The case shows no signs of forced entry. The locks function perfectly. And yet—" He paused, his keen eyes focusing on some detail that escaped the rest of us. With infinite care, he examined the base of the display case, then the surrounding area of the dais. "Monsieur Poirot," Dr. Moretti interjected with scholarly eagerness, "I examined that case thoroughly at 7:15 this evening. The bracelet was secure, the mechanisms functioning exactly as designed. I stake my professional reputation upon it." "And yet, mon docteur," Poirot replied with gentle irony, straightening from his examination, "reputations have been staked upon less substantial foundations and lost just as completely. Tell me, during your inspection, did you notice anything unusual? Any small detail, however insignificant it might have seemed?" The Italian scholar's face flushed slightly. "Nothing whatsoever. The piece was exactly as it should have been, precisely positioned on its velvet cushion." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, then turned his attention to the timeline. "And the keys? They were secure throughout this period?" "My key never left my person," Lady Isabel confirmed. "I wore it on a chain beneath my dress. Graves maintained possession of the second key according to our established security protocol." Graves stepped forward with measured precision. "The key remained in my possession throughout the evening, sir. I made my final inspection at 7:30, just before announcing that refreshments were being served." "Ah," Poirot's eyebrows rose with interest. "So between 7:15 and 7:30, we have two separate confirmations of the bracelet's presence, and yet by 8:30, when the case was opened before witnesses, it had vanished completely. This suggests a window of opportunity most precisely defined." As Poirot continued his methodical questioning, I observed the subtle interplay of expressions among our fellow prisoners. Each face told a story of carefully guarded secrets, financial pressures, and hidden motivations that would soon be dragged into the merciless light of investigation. The game, as my friend would undoubtedly call it, had truly begun. The last bracelet of the Duchess of Florence had vanished, but in its absence, it had revealed something far more valuable to a detective of Poirot's caliber: a locked room full of suspects, each with secrets worth protecting and motives worth concealing. There exists in the methodology of Hercule Poirot a precision that transforms chaos into order, confusion into clarity. Like a master clockmaker examining the intricate mechanisms of a timepiece, he approached the evening's participants with that particular combination of courtesy and relentless logic that made evasion seem not merely futile, but somehow impolite. The interrogation chamber was arranged with characteristic attention to psychological detail. In the smaller library, adjacent to the blue salon, Poirot positioned 2 chairs at a gentle angle to one another, not confrontational, but conducive to revelation. The single shaded lamp cast a pool of patient light upon the writing table, while the thick Persian rug muffled footsteps and created an atmosphere of intimate confession. "Order and method, Hastings," he murmured as we prepared for the first interview. "We shall obtain the account of each person for the period between 7:15 and 8:30. We will note not merely what they say, but the manner in which they say it. The truth, mon ami, betrays itself not in the words alone, but in the harmony, or discord, of the entire performance." Lady Isabel Renfield entered first, her aristocratic composure carefully reconstructed, but still fragile around the edges. Miss Armitage hovered nearby with pencil and paper, ready to record every detail with secretarial precision. The financial arrangements for this evening, Poirot began with delicate directness. They were of what nature, if you would be so kind as to explain? A flush crept across Lady Isabel's features, the first crack in her carefully maintained facade. The bracelet was to be offered for private sale. The reserve price was established at £50,000, though Dr. Moretti assured me that pieces of such provenance often command higher figures. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The death duties, you understand, have made certain adjustments to our circumstances necessary. Your movements during the critical period, madame. From 7:30 until 8, I received guests in the ballroom. Mrs. Bloom, Captain March, and Mr. Vesey, among others. At 8, precisely, I went to the music room to ensure the quartet's readiness. At 8:15, I returned to speak with the Contessa about her family's historical interest in the piece. At 8:25, we prepared for the unveiling. And your key, it remained secure throughout." She touched her throat instinctively, where the chain lay beneath her evening dress. "It never left my person. I did not remove it once during the entire evening." Graves presented himself next, his bearing as upright and precise as a military inspection. The butler's testimony established the crucial baseline of security and timing. "My final inspection was at precisely 7:30, sir," he reported with characteristic precision. "The bracelet was secure, the mechanisms functioning perfectly. After that, I supervised the refreshments and ensured the serving staff maintained their positions." "Did anyone request special access to the display case during this period?" Graves considered carefully. Mrs. Bloom paused and inquired whether such glass could truly deter a determined thief. I replied that honest folk were deterred better by conscience than by crystal. Mr. Vesey requested that I adjust the velvet rope. He claimed it hung too low and would impede the guest's view of the piece. "And did you make this adjustment?" "I did not. The rope was positioned according to Lady Isabel's specific instructions. Mr. Vesey appeared displeased by my refusal." Miss Celia Armitage's interview revealed the methodical mind of a professional observer. Her grey silk dress and coral beads gave her an unremarkable appearance, but her sharp eyes missed nothing of significance. At 7:35, I took telephone inquiries from the Morning Ledger regarding tomorrow's coverage. she recited with clockwork precision. At 7:45, I ensured the string quartet were properly positioned. At 8:05, I corrected the placement cards in the supper room. Mrs. Bloom had objected to being seated near the service entrance. At 8:10, I secured the red drawing room to prevent guests from wandering. At 8:20, I retrieved spare programs from the cloak cabinet. You mentioned missing matches to graves? Yes, at 8:13 precisely. I required them to light the candelabra in the music room. The left branch was proving stubborn. My own matches had somehow gone astray. Poirot made a careful note. During your movements, did you observe anyone alone near the display case? Miss Armitage's efficient demeanor flickered slightly. Perhaps for a moment at 7:50. Mr. Vesey was examining the information plaque quite intently. Mrs. Dorothy Bloom entered with the confident stride of a woman accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. Her American directness cut through the evening's accumulated tension like a sharp blade through silk. That bracelet was magnificent, Monsieur Poirot, she declared without preamble. I had authorization from my clients to bid as high as £75,000, with additional funds available if the competition proved fierce. American collectors don't appreciate losing bidding wars, particularly when the pieces involved have such dramatic historical significance. Your movements during the critical period, madame? From 7:45, I was with Lady Isabel and that handsome Captain March, discussing the bracelet's provenance. At 8, I went to the supper room. English canapes are a crime against good taste, but one must maintain appearances. At 8:10, I took a turn along the windows to escape the crowd, and at 8:20, I returned for the grand unveiling. You observed the other guests with what degree of attention? Mrs. Bloom's eyes sparkled with shrewd intelligence. In my business, you learn to watch people as carefully as you watch the merchandise. Captain March was nervous as a cat in a thunderstorm, kept checking his pocket watch and smoking like a factory chimney. That Italian professor was jumpy too, muttering to himself in what I assume was his native language. And the Contessa spent more time staring at that bracelet than all the rest of us combined. Dr. Felix Moretti's scholarly composure cracked under Poirot's methodical pressure. The Italian art historian's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette, and his usually perfect English became peppered with agitated Italian phrases. The authentication process revealed no irregularities whatsoever, he insisted with defensive vehemence. The goldwork bears the distinctive marks of Benedetto Cellini's workshop. The sapphires show characteristic inclusions of cashmere stones. The documentation traces an unbroken chain of ownership from the Duchess's estate sale. And yet, Dottore, something troubles you about this piece, does it not? Dr. Moretti's composure shattered entirely. There are complications in the world of Italian antiquities, Monsieur Poirot. Political changes, scattered families, documentation that was sometimes deliberately obscured during periods of upheaval. The bracelet's removal from Florence occurred during great political turmoil. There are those who would argue that certain treasures were not legally acquired, regardless of subsequent sales. You speak of the Contessa's claims? Among others, he admitted reluctantly. Such disputes can affect even the most carefully authenticated pieces. Captain Alan March strode in with the peculiar belligerence of the desperately nervous. His military bearing could not quite conceal the tremor in his hands or the perspiration beading his forehead despite the salon's comfortable temperature. The collectors I represent prefer anonymity in their acquisitions, he explained with forced precision. Military men who have served in various campaigns often develop appreciation for historical artifacts connected to European royalty. Your authorization for this evening's purchase, it was established at what limit? The captain's jaw tightened visibly. I was empowered to secure the piece at any reasonable price. My clients do not appreciate being outbid on items of particular historical significance. Your route through the house during the critical period, mon capitaine. I remained in the main reception areas throughout the evening, took refreshments, examined some of Lady Isabel's other pieces in the library, stepped out to the terrace for a cigarette at 8:15. Poirot's keen eyes noted the slight bulge in the captain's left jacket pocket and the way his gaze avoided direct contact. The terrace is accessed through the red drawing room, is it not? Among other routes, yes, March replied stiffly. Miss Armitage observed you leaving the red drawing room at 7:55, yet you mentioned the terrace visit at 8:15. That is curious, no? The captain's face flushed dangerously. I may have made multiple visits. The evening was quite warm. Contessa Bianca Ricci entered last, her ethereal beauty and quiet dignity transforming the small library into something resembling a Renaissance court. Her pale yellow gloves remained folded in her lap, her ivory fan closed and still. The bracelet, she began softly, her voice carrying the musical cadence of her Italian heritage, belongs to Florence. It has known exile long enough. Perhaps it simply wished to return home. Your family's historical connection to the piece, Contessa, it is of what precise nature? My great-grandmother was lady-in-waiting to the last Duchess. When the monarchy fell and the Duchess fled into exile, many treasures were hastily sold under circumstances that were less than ideal. A forced sale, you understand, conducted under political duress. To see this bracelet displayed as another family's property was painful. Your movements this evening? From 7:30, I spoke with no one for several minutes. English parties can be overwhelming. At 8, I requested that a window be opened as the atmosphere had become stifling. Then I sat near the window, observing the proceedings from a distance. At 8:20, I positioned myself where I could witness the unveiling without being conspicuous. You dislike drafts, I believe, yet you requested the window. The Contessa's smile was faint but meaningful. I dislike the English passion for sealed rooms even more, Monsieur Poirot, and you look for passions of an entirely different nature. As the final interview concluded, Poirot remained motionless in his chair, fingertips pressed together, his gaze directed downward as if watching invisible pieces arrange themselves into comprehensible patterns. You observe it, Hastings? He said quietly. We have alibis that do not truly alibi, times that shift like desert sand, and the small lies of social convenience. Someone was alone near that case, if only for a crucial moment. But who? I asked, though I suspected he had already begun to form his conclusions. Poirot's green eyes lifted, bright with the particular satisfaction of a puzzle beginning to reveal its secrets. Patience, mon ami. Already we have certain contradictions that demand explanation. Monsieur Vézé's concern with the rope, the captain's multiple routes and shifting timeline, the mysteriously missing matches of Mademoiselle Armitage, the Contessa's need for air, Dr. Moretti's defensive protestations, and Mrs. Bloom's shrewd observations of her fellow competitors. He rose from his chair with characteristic precision. It is not the glass case that was truly locked this evening, Hastings. It is the hearts and minds of our suspects. But those locks I possess the proper keys to open. The methodical foundation had been laid. Now the real work of detection could begin, as Poirot's little grey cells began their inexorable process of separating truth from deception, motive from opportunity, and guilt from mere unfortunate circumstance. The grey London morning cast a different light upon the events at Renfield House, transforming the previous evening's glittering assembly into something more prosaic and decidedly more sinister. Inspector Japp had established his temporary headquarters in Lord Renfield's study, where the leather-bound volumes and sporting prints provided a reassuring backdrop of English respectability that seemed increasingly at odds with the criminal investigation now unfolding within these walls. The Morning Post had brought disturbing revelations. Telegraph messages from banks, solicitors, and business associates painted a picture of financial desperation that extended far beyond what the previous evening's elegant facades had suggested. Japp spread the correspondence across the mahogany desk with the grim satisfaction of a man who understood that money remained the most reliable motive for crime. The situation grows more complex by the hour, Poirot, he announced, tapping a particularly damning telegram. Captain March owes nearly £8,000 to various creditors, with final demands issued just last week. Mrs. Bloom's authorization comes from a consortium that operates in what we might charitably call grey areas of international collecting. And our friend Vese's art business has been teetering on the edge of bankruptcy for months. Poirot examined each document with his characteristic precision, his green eyes noting details that escaped more casual observation. The financial pressures, they create the motive, certainement. But we must distinguish between the desperation that leads to foolish acts and the calculation that produces masterful crimes. The first significant discovery came from an unexpected quarter. Constable Morrison appeared at the study door, his face flushed with the excitement of meaningful discovery. In his gloved hands, he carried a small evidence tray containing items that would soon focus the investigation with laser-like intensity. "Found these in Mr. Vese's overcoat, sir," he reported with barely contained triumph. "Hidden in the inside pocket, wrapped in tissue paper." The tray contained 3 items that seemed to tell a complete story of criminal preparation: a small block of red sealing wax, partially used, a length of thin rubber tubing, and most damning of all, a piece of stiff paper bearing the clear impression of an ornate key. Japp's eyebrows rose with satisfaction. "Well, well, what do we make of this, then?" Poirot accepted the tray with his customary delicacy, examining each item as if it might reveal secrets beyond its obvious implications. He sniffed the sealing wax, noting its particular composition. He measured the rubber tubing against his fingers, estimating its diameter and flexibility. And he studied the key impression under his magnifying glass with the intensity of a scholar examining an ancient manuscript. "Most illuminating," he murmured. "The wax is of excellent quality, the type used by professional restorers. The rubber tubing is precisely the sort employed to create gentle pressure without leaving marks. And this impression—" He held the paper to the light, revealing the intricate details of the key's head. "It is remarkably clear, suggesting considerable skill in its creation." Within minutes, Lionel Vesey found himself facing his accusers in the familiar setting of the library. The art dealer's nervous energy had transformed overnight into barely controlled panic. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. His hair disheveled, his hands trembling as he attempted to maintain his composure. "Mr. Vesey," Japp began with official gravity, "perhaps you'd care to explain how these items came to be in your possession?" Vesey's response came in a rush of defensive explanation. "The sealing wax is standard equipment in my profession. I use it for securing valuable items during transport. The rubber tubing serves a similar purpose, creating cushioned pressure points within packing cases. As for that paper," his voice faltered, "I have no idea how it came to be there. Someone must have planted it." "Planted by whom?" Japp's tone suggested he found this explanation less than convincing. Poirot intervened with characteristic gentleness. "Monsieur Vesey, let us consider the practical aspects of your supposed crime. You suggest that you created this impression earlier, then had a duplicate key manufactured. But tell me, where in Belgrave Square might one find a locksmith capable of creating a key to such precise specifications, and in what period of time?" The question hung in the air, its implications becoming clear to everyone present. Vesey's face showed a mixture of relief and confusion as he realized the logical impossibility of the scenario being constructed around him. "The lock mechanism," Poirot continued, "was commissioned specifically for this display case from Hartwell and Sons, the finest security specialists in London. Their tolerances are measured in fractions of millimeters. To create a functional duplicate would require not merely an impression, but access to their workshops and several days of precision work." Japp's certainty began to waver, but his policeman's instincts remained focused on the tangible evidence. Perhaps he had an accomplice, someone with the necessary skills and equipment. "Ah, but that introduces complications, does it not?" Poirot's mustaches twitched with what I recognized as suppressed amusement. We must now imagine not merely one desperate art dealer, but an entire conspiracy involving skilled craftsmen, precise timing, and coordination worthy of a military operation, all to steal a bracelet from a locked case in full view of London society. A second constable appeared with additional evidence that seemed to support the case against Vezet. "Found this under the display case, sir, a small fragment that appears to have chipped off during the theft." The tiny shard caught the morning light with brilliant blue fire, appearing for all the world like a piece of genuine sapphire. Japp examined it with growing satisfaction, seeing in it confirmation of his developing theory. "Chipped it during the removal, did you?" he asked Vezet with obvious pleasure. "Nervous hands make for clumsy work." But Poirot's examination of the fragment told a different story. With infinite care, he touched the shard to the edge of the crystal dome, producing a faint but unmistakable squeak. "Glass," he announced serenely. "Excellent paste, but glass nonetheless. If this came from our missing bracelet, then the Duchess of Florence wore very pretty costume jewelry indeed." The revelation cast doubt upon the entire chain of evidence. If the fragment was paste rather than genuine sapphire, what did that suggest about the nature of the theft? And if Vezet was being framed, who possessed both the skill to create such convincing false evidence and the knowledge of his financial difficulties? "Consider the psychology of the situation," Poirot addressed the room at large. "What manner of criminal plants evidence of his guilt in his own overcoat? Either we are dealing with a man of spectacular stupidity, or someone wishes very much for us to reach certain conclusions about Mr. Vezet's involvement." Vezet's relief was palpable, though he remained visibly shaken by his narrow escape from false accusation. "I may be many things, Monsieur Poirot, but I'm not fool enough to carry a burglar's kit to the scene of my own crime." As the morning progressed, Poirot's attention turned to the broader implications of the planted evidence. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to create a convincing false lead, complete with professional quality props and carefully placed physical evidence. This suggested not merely criminal skill, but intimate knowledge of police procedures and the psychology of investigation. The true criminal reveals himself through his very attempt at misdirection, Poirot observed to me as we watched Vezet's departure under police escort. Not as a prisoner, but as a witness whose testimony might prove valuable. He is impatient, our thief. He wishes to conclude this matter quickly, before deeper investigation can reveal truths he prefers to keep hidden. But who among our suspects possesses such knowledge of criminal investigation? Poirot's smile was enigmatic as he straightened his tie with characteristic precision. That, mon ami, is precisely what we must now determine. The obvious suspect has been eliminated, but in his elimination we have learned much about the true nature of our adversary. Someone in this house possesses skills that extend far beyond mere theft. They understand the art of deception itself. The first false lead had been exposed, but rather than simplifying the case, it had revealed layers of complexity that promised to challenge even Poirot's formidable powers of deduction. The game was becoming truly interesting, and somewhere within the walls of Renfield House, a master criminal was undoubtedly watching the proceedings with the satisfaction of someone who believed their carefully laid plans were proceeding exactly as intended. The hunt for the truth had only just begun, and already it was clear that before it concluded, more than one carefully guarded secret would be dragged into the merciless light of exposure. The elimination of Lionel Vezet as a suspect, far from representing a setback in the investigation, had revealed something far more significant than mere innocence. As Hercule Poirot settled into the leather armchair in Lord Renfield's study, his green eyes bright with the particular satisfaction of a puzzle beginning to reveal its deeper complexities, he addressed the assembled company with characteristic precision. The morning light cast different shadows upon the previous evening's events, transforming what had initially appeared as a straightforward theft into something far more sophisticated and infinitely more dangerous. Inspector Japp, his practical policeman's mind still grappling with the implications of the planted evidence, paced the Persian carpet with barely contained frustration. "So we're back to square one, are we, Poirot?" Japp grumbled, his weathered face showing the strain of a case that refused to conform to standard investigative procedures. A locked room, a vanished bracelet, and a collection of well-bred suspects, none of whom seem inclined toward honest confession. "Ah, mon ami," Poirot replied with gentle correction, his fingertips pressed together in that characteristic gesture of contemplation. "We are not back to square one. We have advanced considerably, though perhaps not in the direction you might prefer. The false evidence against Monsieur Vezet tells us much about the mind we are dealing with. This is not the work of a common thief, but of a master strategist." The implications of this revelation settled upon the room like morning mist. Someone among their refined company possessed not merely the audacity to steal, but the sophisticated understanding of criminal investigation necessary to create convincing false evidence. The sealing wax impression, the rubber tubing, the paste sapphire fragment, each element had been carefully crafted to lead the investigation down a predetermined path. "Consider the psychology of our criminal," Poirot continued, rising to pace before the tall windows that overlooked Belgrave Square. "He anticipated our desire for a swift resolution, a convenient scapegoat. He provided one, complete with plausible motive and fabricated physical evidence. This is not opportunistic crime, mes amis. This is criminal artistry of the highest order." Lady Isabel, who had maintained her composure throughout the morning's revelations, finally spoke with a voice that trembled despite her efforts at control. "Monsieur Poirot, there is something I must tell you, something that may change your understanding of last evening's events entirely." The confession, when it came, struck the assembled company with the force of revelation. The magnificent bracelet that had graced the crystal display case, the object of such elaborate security arrangements and careful authentication, had not been the original Duchess of Florence's treasure at all. The genuine bracelet was sold 3 years ago to meet death duties, Lady Isabel admitted, her aristocratic dignity crumbling under the weight of financial necessity. What remained in our vault was an excellent copy, created by Garrard and Company to maintain appearances until circumstances required its disposal as well. Dr. Moretti's scholarly composure shattered entirely at this revelation. "The irregularities I noted during authentication," he confessed with obvious distress, "the goldwork techniques that seemed anachronistic, the sapphires that lacked certain characteristics of genuine cashmere stones. I suspected it might be a later copy, but chose not to emphasize these concerns in my preliminary assessment." The revelation transformed the entire investigation. If there had been no genuine bracelet to steal, then what had actually occurred in the ballroom the previous evening? Poirot's keen mind immediately seized upon the most obvious explanation. "Insurance fraud," he announced with quiet satisfaction. "A most elegant solution to financial difficulties. Stage an elaborate theft before witnesses, collect the insurance settlement, and retire one's debts with perfect respectability." But Miss Armitage, ever the efficient keeper of household affairs, delivered the information that shattered this theory as completely as the previous one. "I'm afraid that explanation contains a fundamental flaw, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Isabel cancelled the insurance policy on the bracelet 6 months ago when the premiums became prohibitive. There would be no financial benefit from its theft. The psychological pressure of these revelations had created exactly the atmosphere Poirot required for his more subtle investigative techniques. Rather than formal interrogation, he now employed a series of seemingly casual conversations, each designed to probe the psychological defenses of his suspects with surgical precision. Captain March, discovered nursing a brandy in the smoking room, found himself subjected to Poirot's particular brand of conversational pressure. The bracelet's historical significance, Poirot mused with apparent casualness. It belonged to a woman who faced the fall of a monarchy. Such circumstances can lead to difficult choices, can they not, Capitaine? The military man's discomfort was palpable as Poirot continued his gentle probing. "Your client's interest in this piece was considerable, sufficient perhaps to cause a man to take liberties with the truth? A visit to the terrace, for instance, at a time when he was elsewhere entirely?" Dr. Moretti received similar treatment in the library, where Poirot found him examining a first edition of Cellini's autobiography. The pursuit of beauty, or perhaps the pursuit of ownership of beauty, can lead to similar compromises today, non? Poirot inquired with deceptive mildness. A family seeking to reclaim what they believe is theirs by right, regardless of what the law might say. The Italian scholar's trembling hands, as he closed the book, did not escape Poirot's observation, nor did the defensive edge that crept into his voice as he spoke of historical injustices and the inadequacies of legal ownership. The afternoon brought unexpected physical evidence that promised to advance the investigation beyond mere psychological maneuvering. Graves appeared in the study with news that sent a ripple of excitement through the investigative team. "Monsieur Poirot," the butler announced with his characteristic dignity slightly shaken, "there has been a development. The key to the red drawing-room, when I went to retrieve it for the scheduled search, I discovered it had been exchanged for a near duplicate. Similar in appearance, but the warding is entirely wrong." Inspector Japp's eyes brightened with the satisfaction of tangible evidence. "Someone's been busy, haven't they? And what else, Graves?" "The housemaid reports that the cloak cabinet was found ajar, sir. It is never left in such a condition according to our established procedures." Poirot received this information with the quiet satisfaction of a master angler feeling the first tentative tug upon his line. The criminal, subjected to the psychological pressure of prolonged investigation and the threat of systematic searches, had been compelled to act. In doing so, they had revealed not only their location, but their state of mind. "Très bien," Poirot murmured, his moustaches twitching with suppressed satisfaction. "Our sophisticated criminal begins to show the strain of maintaining such elaborate deceptions. The switched key tells us they possess access to locksmithing tools or knowledge. The disturbed cloak cabinet suggests they have hidden something there, or retrieved something previously concealed." As the gray afternoon light faded toward evening, the investigation had transformed from a simple theft inquiry into a complex psychological duel between Poirot's methodical deduction and a criminal mind of remarkable sophistication. The false lead had been exposed, the true nature of the stolen object revealed, and the psychological pressure had begun to force the guilty party into revealing actions. Somewhere within the walls of Renfield House, a master criminal was discovering that intellectual arrogance, however sophisticated, was no match for the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. The game had entered its most dangerous phase, where the distinction between hunter and hunted would soon become clear to all involved. The bracelet might have been paste, the insurance non-existent, and the obvious suspect eliminated. But the truth, like morning light penetrating the darkest corners, was beginning to illuminate secrets that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep hidden. The morning light filtering through the tall windows of Renfield House seemed to cast longer shadows than the previous evening, as if the very atmosphere had thickened with accumulated secrets and barely contained tensions. The elegant mansion had transformed from a showcase of refined society into something resembling a genteel prison, where every footstep echoed with suspicion and every glance carried the weight of unspoken accusations. Hercule Poirot moved through these charged spaces with the calculated precision of a master strategist, understanding that the elimination of the obvious suspect had created exactly the psychological pressure he required. The planted evidence against Vesey had revealed a criminal mind of remarkable sophistication, someone who understood not merely the mechanics of theft, but the psychology of investigation itself. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured as we approached the red drawing-room, "how our suspects betray themselves through their very attempts at composure. Mrs. Bloom paces like a caged predator, her American confidence showing hairline fractures. Captain March consumes cigarettes with mechanical intensity, fighting to maintain his military bearing. The Contessa maintains her ethereal beauty, yet her eyes have acquired a watchfulness that speaks of calculation beneath serenity. The matter of the switched key had provided the breakthrough Poirot required. Graves, his dignity only slightly frayed by the morning's revelations, led us to the red drawing-room with the correct key retrieved from the household safe. The room itself was a jewel box of French taste, crimson damask walls, gilt chairs with worn tapestry seats, and windows giving upon the narrow balcony between house and square. "You note it, mon ami," Poirot inhaled delicately as we entered. "There is a faint odor, not perfume, but something more practical. Metal polish, perhaps." His keen observation proved correct. Upon the clean white marble of the mantelpiece lay a dull smear the color of old rose, jeweler's rouge, the type used for polishing precious metals. The parquet floor bore a small crescent mark where a heel had turned sharply, and from the hinge of the built-in cloak cabinet, Poirot extracted a near-invisible filament of black silk, fine as hair and broken at one end. The cabinet itself yielded more significant discoveries. Hidden beneath the lowest shelf lay a tiny screwdriver with a knurled handle and a square of chamois leather smudged with the same rose-colored rouge. These were the tools of a professional, or someone with professional knowledge of jewelry work. The dust line on the balcony door tells its own story, Poirot observed, examining the French windows with his magnifying glass. It has been opened and closed more than once in the last 12 hours, and by someone cautious enough to wear gloves, for there are no fingerprints on the handle. Inspector Japp's satisfaction was evident as he catalogued each piece of evidence. Professional tools, careful planning, access to the house. We're narrowing the field considerably, Poirot. With the physical evidence secured, Poirot turned his attention to the psychological dimension of the investigation. He requested that Lady Isabel assemble the remaining suspects in the morning room for what he termed an informal discussion of the evening's curious implications. The gathering revealed the mounting strain upon each participant. Dr. Moretti had become increasingly agitated, his scholarly composure cracking under the relentless pressure of methodical questioning. His hands trembled as he attempted to light a cigarette, and his usually perfect English became peppered with agitated Italian phrases. "The authentication process," he explained with defensive vehemence when Poirot inquired about his expertise, "requires absolute precision. One cannot afford assumptions based on incomplete evidence. The slightest doubt can destroy a reputation built over decades of careful scholarship." "And yet, mon docteur," Poirot replied with gentle persistence, "you suspected the bracelet was not genuine from your initial examination. This creates interesting questions about professional ethics, does it not?" The Contessa's response to Poirot's probing revealed layers of complexity beneath her serene exterior. "In Florence, Monsieur Poirot, we understand that ownership can be a complex tapestry, woven with threads of conquest, diplomacy, and sometimes outright deception. To reclaim such an item, even symbolically, might be seen by some as an act of historical justice." Captain March's military bearing could not quite conceal his mounting desperation. "If there's a dangerous criminal loose in this house," he declared with forced authority, "we need proper security arrangements. This has gone far beyond civilized bounds." Miss Armitage, ever the efficient secretary, had positioned herself at a small writing desk, ostensibly taking notes, but clearly observing every nuance of the proceedings. Her coral beads caught the morning light as she moved, and Poirot's keen eyes noted how her left-handed writing style differed from the signatures he had observed the previous evening. It was at this moment of mounting psychological pressure that the second crime occurred. A sharp cry from the library interrupted Poirot's methodical questioning, followed by the rapid clatter of feet in the corridor. We rushed to find Dr. Moretti unconscious beside the mahogany reading table, a thin trickle of blood marking where his head had struck the carpet. The scene bore the hallmarks of swift, calculated violence. The room showed no signs of struggle, suggesting the attack had been unexpected. Most significantly, several documents related to the bracelet's authentication lay scattered across the floor, with certain pages conspicuously missing while others had been deliberately left behind. "Struck with something heavy and blunt," Inspector Japp announced after examining the victim's injuries. "The brass letter opener from the desk is missing, probably our weapon." Poirot's investigation revealed the true significance of the assault. The scattered papers were not randomly distributed, but showed signs of careful selection. The missing documents contained specific technical details about the bracelet's construction and provenance, information that could expose deeper deceptions than mere forgery. "Most illuminating," Poirot murmured as he examined the evidence with his magnifying glass. "Our criminal grows desperate, but also more revealing. This attack was not random violence. It was designed to prevent Dr. Moretti from sharing specific knowledge that could unravel our thief's carefully constructed narrative." As Dr. Moretti was attended by the family physician, he regained consciousness long enough to whisper something in Italian that sent a chill through the assembled company. The Contessa, translating with obvious reluctance, reported his words. "He says the bracelet was not the only deception. There were other secrets, other lies that someone was willing to kill to protect." The psychological impact of this second crime transformed the investigation entirely. The genteel atmosphere of London society had been stripped away to reveal something far more primitive and infinitely more deadly. Someone among their refined company was willing to commit violence to protect their secrets. Mrs. Bloom's reaction was immediate and characteristically direct. "This has gone far beyond acceptable limits. I came here for a civilized auction, not to be trapped in some Gothic nightmare with a violent criminal." Her earlier enthusiasm for the investigation had transformed into genuine fear. The Contessa's response proved most revealing. Rather than showing shock or outrage, she displayed a curious detachment that suggested either remarkable composure or complete lack of surprise. "Violence is always regrettable," she observed with philosophical calm, "but sometimes it becomes necessary when other methods of communication fail." As the unconscious scholar was prepared for removal to hospital, Poirot gathered the remaining suspects for his analysis of the morning's developments. His green eyes held the particular satisfaction of a detective whose theories were being confirmed by events. "The psychology becomes clear, mes amis," he announced with quiet authority. "We are not dealing with a simple thief, but with someone whose entire carefully constructed life depends upon maintaining certain deceptions. The theft of a worthless copy was never about monetary gain. It was about control, about reputation, about asserting claims that could not be made through legal channels." He paused, allowing his words to settle upon the assembled company like morning mist revealing hidden landscapes. Dr. Moretti possessed knowledge that threatened to expose these lies, and so he was silenced. But in silencing him, our criminal has revealed far more about their identity and motivations than they realize. The second crime had been committed, but rather than providing escape, it had tightened the net around the guilty party. The psychological chess match was approaching its endgame, and Hercule Poirot's little grey cells had begun to perceive the final pattern that would expose the truth behind the elaborate deceptions. Somewhere in the shadows of Renfield House, a master criminal was discovering that intellectual sophistication offered no protection against the relentless logic of the world's greatest detective. The game was nearly over, and soon the truth would emerge with all the inevitability of sunrise after the darkest night. The web of motives had been exposed, the physical evidence catalogued, and the psychological pressure had forced the criminal into revealing violence. Now only the final confrontation remained, where all secrets would be dragged into the merciless light of exposure, and justice would finally be served. The morning light filtering through Renfield House's tall windows seemed to cast longer shadows than mere sunlight should create, as if the very atmosphere had thickened with accumulated secrets and the metallic taste of violence. The attack upon Dr. Moretti had stripped away the last vestiges of drawing-room civility, revealing beneath the polished surface something far more primitive and infinitely more dangerous. Hercule Poirot moved through these charged spaces with the calculated precision of a master strategist, understanding that the escalation to violence had created exactly the psychological pressure he required to force the truth from its carefully constructed hiding places. The elegant mansion had become a pressure cooker of guilt and fear, where every gesture carried weight and every silence spoke volumes. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured as we surveyed the transformed household, "how our suspects betray themselves through their very attempts at composure. The violence has shattered their carefully maintained facades, and now we see the true nature of what lies beneath." The morning brought word from St. Bartholomew's Hospital that while Dr. Moretti remained unconscious, his condition had stabilized. The Italian scholar would recover, though it might be days before he could provide testimony about what he had discovered. Poirot received this news with characteristic equanimity, though I detected in his manner the satisfaction of a chess master who had anticipated his opponent's moves. "Our criminal grows desperate, mon ami," he observed with quiet certainty. "The attack was calculated to prevent specific knowledge from being shared, but desperate people make revealing mistakes. Already I perceive the pattern that will lead us to the truth." With Inspector Japp's permission, Poirot arranged what he termed a small reconstruction of the previous evening's events. The ballroom was restored to its former configuration, with the empty crystal dome standing upon its velvet-draped dais, like a transparent monument to vanished treasure. "Mesdames, messieurs," Poirot announced with courtly precision, "we shall recreate only the atmosphere of the evening. Each of you will position yourselves as you did before the unveiling, move as you moved, observe as you observed. Sometimes the truth reveals itself not in what was seen, but in what was overlooked." The suspects arranged themselves with varying degrees of reluctance. Mrs. Bloom took her position for optimal viewing, her earlier enthusiasm now tempered by genuine apprehension. Captain March positioned himself with military precision, though his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his cigarette case. The Contessa moved with her characteristic ethereal grace to the window, her pale yellow gloves immaculate despite the morning's tensions. Miss Armitage stood efficiently behind Lady Isabel's right shoulder, her notebook balanced upon a silver tray, her coral beads catching the morning light. Yet Poirot's keen eyes noted subtle changes, the way she positioned herself with clear views of all exits, how her left hand bore a small bandage that had not been present the previous evening. "And now," Poirot continued, producing a piece of chamois leather from his waistcoat, "permit me a small variation. If someone would be so kind as to lift this glass dome, taking care not to leave unsightly fingerprints." The request created exactly the psychological pressure Poirot intended. Mrs. Bloom waved away the task with visible distaste. Captain March stepped forward but gripped the crystal awkwardly, causing it to catch against its base with an embarrassing suction sound. His face reddened as he struggled with the mechanism. Miss Armitage, with a movement so natural it appeared unconscious, reached past the fumbling captain and grasped the dome at its crown. With professional efficiency, she placed 2 fingers against the curve to break the vacuum seal while applying the chamois to the rim with her other hand, twisting slightly as she lifted. The crystal rose as smoothly as morning mist. "Très bien," Poirot murmured with obvious satisfaction. "Most instructive." The demonstration revealed far more than mere technique. Miss Armitage's movements showed the practiced skill of someone intimately familiar with handling delicate glass and crystal, the kind of expertise that came from years of managing valuable objects and maintaining household treasures. "In my position," she explained with slight color in her cheeks, "one learns to handle such things without leaving marks or causing damage. Lady Isabel's collection requires constant care." The Contessa observed the scene with an expression that might have been amusement. "Such skills are valuable," she remarked with musical precision. "In Florence, we learned that those who care for treasures often understand them better than those who merely own them." Following the reconstruction, Poirot led the company to the red drawing room, where the morning's discoveries lay arranged like pieces of an intricate puzzle. The jeweller's rouge upon the mantelpiece seemed rosier in the afternoon light, while the tiny screwdriver and chamois leather bore silent testimony to professional-level preparation. "My friends," Poirot began with characteristic gentleness, "you have been patient with my methods. Now I will speak briefly about the mind of our thief, for understanding the psychology is essential to comprehending the crime." He paused, allowing the silence to prime the nerves of his audience before continuing with soft authority. "This person is not a common criminal. They are exact, fastidious, and possessed of considerable technical skill. They understand metals, glass, and the delicate mechanisms of security. They are familiar with the household's geography in ways invisible to casual guests. Above all, they are a planner of remarkable foresight and sang-froid." The psychological pressure in the room became almost tangible as each suspect felt the weight of Poirot's analysis. Lady Isabel had grown pale, her aristocratic composure showing hairline fractures. Captain March's jaw set in that obstinate line that spoke of military discipline warring with civilian panic. Mrs. Bloom's pencil tapped with mechanical intensity against her notepad. "There is another detail," Poirot added with deceptive casualness, "that narrows our field considerably. Our thief is left-handed." The reaction was immediate and revealing. Mrs. Bloom glanced at her own right hand with visible relief. Captain March looked genuinely puzzled. The Contessa arched her elegant eyebrows with what might have been admiration for Poirot's deductive skills. Miss Armitage's pencil paused over her notebook, leaving a small smear where the wet ink brushed against the side of her left hand. But Poirot's most significant revelation was yet to come. From his waistcoat pocket, he produced a photograph taken during the initial authentication process, studying it with his magnifying glass before passing it to Inspector Japp. "The 7th sapphire," he announced with quiet triumph, "the stone representing the Palatine Hill. Observe how the light refracts differently from its companions, how the goldwork surrounding it shows subtle variations in technique. This stone has been recently reset, and by someone with considerable expertise but not quite the mastery of the original Renaissance craftsman." Lady Isabel's composure cracked entirely at this revelation. "How could you possibly—" she began, then stopped, her hand flying to her throat where the security key lay hidden beneath her dress. "Because, madame, this stone is genuine. While the remainder of the bracelet was an excellent copy created to maintain appearances, you retained one authentic element, the most valuable sapphire from the original piece. It was your last connection to your family's heritage, reset into the copy to preserve something real within the necessary deception." The implication struck the assembled company like a physical blow. If the stolen bracelet contained one genuine cashmere sapphire of museum quality, its value would justify elaborate planning and desperate measures. More importantly, it meant that someone with intimate knowledge of the family's financial arrangements and the bracelet's true composition had orchestrated the entire evening's events. And who, Poirot continued with relentless logic, possessed this knowledge of the genuine stone's presence? Who arranged the evening's security, managed correspondence with potential buyers, and had access to every detail of the house's layout and the bracelet's history? Miss Celia Armitage stood frozen by her writing desk, her efficient demeanor finally cracking to reveal the calculating intelligence that had orchestrated the elaborate deception. Her coral beads, now 24 rather than the original 25, hastily reknotted after sacrificing one strand to create the black silk filament found in the cloak cabinet, caught the afternoon light as her breathing quickened. The net had closed with the inexorable precision of Poirot's methodical mind. The quiet secretary, trusted with every household secret and possessed of professional skills that extended far beyond mere correspondence, had used her position to plan and execute not merely a theft, but a complex psychological manipulation designed to divert suspicion while securing her escape with genuinely valuable treasure. The psychology was masterful, Poirot observed with genuine admiration for the criminal artistry involved. Create an elaborate theft with multiple suspects and obvious motives. Plant false evidence to misdirect the investigation. Then position yourself as the helpful secretary, recording every detail. Who would suspect the efficient companion of such sophisticated criminality? As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the elegant rooms of Renfield House, the final pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place. The hidden clue had been found, the pattern revealed, and the true nature of the deception exposed. But even as the truth emerged, Poirot's keen mind recognized that the most dangerous moment in any investigation comes not with the revelation of guilt, but with the cornered criminal's final, desperate attempt at escape. The game was nearly concluded, but the final moves remained to be played, and Miss Celia Armitage had not survived years of managing secrets and maintaining deceptions without developing resources that might yet surprise even the great Hercule Poirot. The stage was set for the classic Christie denouement, where all would be revealed and justice would finally be served. The late afternoon light filtering through Renfield House's tall windows seemed to cast shadows of unusual length and density, as if the very atmosphere had thickened with accumulated secrets and the metallic taste of approaching revelation. The elegant mansion had transformed from a showcase of refined society into something resembling a psychological laboratory, where every gesture carried weight and every silence spoke volumes about guilt and innocence. Hercule Poirot moved through these charged spaces with the calculated precision of a master strategist, understanding that the morning's revelations had created exactly the conditions he required to force the truth from its carefully constructed hiding places. The attack upon Dr. Moretti had stripped away the last vestiges of drawing-room civility, revealing beneath the polished surface something far more primitive and infinitely more dangerous. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured as we positioned ourselves in Lord Renfield's study, "how the psychology of our suspects has evolved throughout this investigation. The planted evidence against Monsieur Vesey revealed a mind of remarkable sophistication. Someone who understands not merely the mechanics of theft, but the very psychology of criminal investigation itself." His green eyes held the particular satisfaction of a detective whose theories were crystallizing into certainty. "Our criminal possesses technical skills, intimate knowledge of the household, and the desperate motive of someone facing a lifetime of genteel poverty. Most significantly, they have revealed themselves through their very attempts at misdirection. The afternoon brought a carefully orchestrated series of psychological pressures designed to force the guilty party into revealing actions. Inspector Japp, following Poirot's precise instructions, announced that a complete search of all personal effects would commence at 6 o'clock sharp. Handbags, gloves, jewelry, and any items that might conceal a small, valuable object. Additionally, word was allowed to circulate that Dr. Moretti had regained consciousness at St. Bartholomew's Hospital and was requesting to see the investigators with urgent information about the authentication irregularities. This second piece of intelligence, though entirely fabricated, created exactly the psychological pressure Poirot required. The reactions were immediate and revealing. Mrs. Bloom's American pragmatism asserted itself as she demanded immediate access to her belongings to organize them properly for inspection. Captain March's military bearing could not quite conceal his mounting agitation as he paced the corridors, checking his pocket watch with mechanical frequency. The Contessa maintained her ethereal composure, though her pale eyes had acquired a watchfulness that spoke of calculation beneath serenity. Miss Celia Armitage's response proved most instructive. Rather than showing concern or curiosity about the announced search, She displayed the efficient professionalism that had characterized her service throughout the investigation. "I shall prepare an inventory of household items that might be confused with personal effects," she announced with characteristic precision. "We must ensure the search proceeds without unnecessary complications." But Poirot's keen observation detected subtle changes in her demeanor that spoke volumes about her true state of mind. The bandage on her left forefinger, supposedly from a paper cut, showed signs of recent adjustment. Her coral necklace, which he had counted the previous evening, now contained 24 beads rather than the original 25. Most significantly, her usual left-handed writing style had been replaced by awkward right-handed script in her afternoon correspondence. "The psychology becomes transparent, mon ami," Poirot observed, as we watched Miss Armitage's movements through the house. "She attempts to conceal her dominant hand, knowing that the filed key markings revealed a left-handed craftsperson. She has sacrificed a coral bead to create the black silk filament we discovered, hastily re-knotting the necklace under stress. Each small deception reveals the larger truth." At precisely 5 o'clock, Poirot implemented his most subtle trap. Through Graves, he arranged for Miss Armitage to be requested in the red drawing-room to verify the condition of certain household items before the official search. The room had been prepared with invisible markers, a single hair-fine thread across the cloak cabinet door, a trace of pale chalk beneath the window curtain, and most ingeniously, a tiny brass bell no larger than a thimble suspended within the curtain rod, where it would chime at the slightest disturbance. We positioned ourselves behind the folding screen that had served as concealment for generations of Renfield family secrets, watching as Miss Armitage entered with her characteristic efficiency. For several heartbeats, she stood perfectly still, her trained senses detecting something unusual in the atmosphere. Then, with movements that revealed years of familiarity with the room's hidden spaces, she approached the cloak cabinet. The silk thread gave the faintest snap as she opened the door. From behind the lowest shelf, where only intimate knowledge of the house's construction would reveal the carpenter's gap between brace and backboard, she retrieved a small packet wrapped in brown paper. For 3 seconds, she held it as one might hold a document of life or death. Then, with swift decision, she moved to the window curtain. The tiny bell chimed once, no more than a breath of sound, as she concealed the packet within the hollow brass curtain rod. Poirot stepped from behind the screen with the quiet dignity of a man entering a church. "Mademoiselle," he said with gentle courtesy, "forgive the liberty, but I believe you have dropped something." The confrontation that followed revealed the true sophistication of the criminal mind they had been pursuing. Miss Armitage's recovery was immediate and masterful, her professional demeanor intact despite the shock of discovery. "Monsieur Poirot, you startled me. I was merely checking the window mechanism. Lady Isabel mentioned it had been sticking." "Ah, but naturally," Poirot replied with perfect politeness. "The mechanisms of old houses require constant attention, though I observe you have injured your hand in such service." Her glance flicked to the bandage on her left forefinger. "A trifling cut from a paper edge. One must be careful when handling delicate correspondence." "Indeed," Poirot agreed, his green eyes noting every nuance of her performance, "though I observe your coral necklace has also suffered some adjustment. Such beautiful beads, originally 25, I believe, though now I count only 24? For the first time, Miss Armitage's composure showed a hairline crack. Her right hand moved instinctively to her throat, where the shortened necklace lay beneath her dress collar. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps you miscounted?" "Perhaps." He conceded with that particular smile that indicated complete certainty disguised as polite doubt. "Though I find my little gray cells are usually quite reliable in such matters. Tell me, during your years of service here, have you developed expertise in handling delicate objects? Crystal, for instance, or precious metals?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke from Captain March's perpetual cigarettes. Miss Armitage's professional training warred with the growing realization that her carefully constructed deceptions were crumbling under the relentless pressure of Poirot's methodical investigation. As the afternoon shadows lengthened toward evening, the psychological net had tightened to the point where movement in any direction would reveal guilt. The genuine sapphire from the Duchess's bracelet remained hidden, but its location was becoming clearer with each passing moment. The criminal's sophisticated planning had been matched by an even more sophisticated investigation, and the final confrontation was approaching with all the inevitability of sunset after the longest day. Miss Celia Armitage, the quiet secretary who had orchestrated one of the most elaborate deceptions in criminal history, was about to discover that intellectual arrogance, however sophisticated, offered no protection against the inexorable logic of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. The game was nearly concluded, and soon all secrets would be dragged into the merciless light of exposure. The stage was set for the classic Christie denouement, where truth would triumph over deception and justice would be served with all the precision and dignity that marked the greatest detective of his age. The affair of the last bracelet of the Duchess of Florence was approaching its dramatic conclusion, and not even the most carefully constructed lies could withstand the approaching revelation. The evening light filtering through the tall windows of Renfield House's ballroom cast shadows that seemed to reach toward the empty crystal dome like accusing fingers. The elegant chamber, which had witnessed such glittering society the previous evening, now served as a theatre for revelation, where the carefully constructed facades of London's finest would finally be stripped away by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot's investigation. The assembled company presented a study in barely controlled tension. Lady Isabel maintained her aristocratic composure despite the financial ruin that threatened to engulf her family's legacy, her pale hands clasped with white-knuckled intensity. Mrs. Dorothy Bloom sat with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to boardroom confrontations, but unprepared for the psychological warfare of criminal investigation. Captain March's military bearing could not quite conceal the tremor in his hands as he reached for his cigarette case with mechanical frequency, the brass lighter clicking repeatedly in the charged silence. The Contessa Bianca Ricci arranged herself with ethereal grace near the tall windows, her pale yellow gloves folded with perfect precision in her lap, though her tea-colored eyes held a watchfulness that spoke of calculations extending far beyond mere social pleasantry. Dr. Moretti, pale but determined despite his recent ordeal, occupied a chair positioned where he could observe the proceedings without strain, the white bandage around his head a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered the evening's civilized veneer. Miss Celia Armitage positioned herself at her customary writing desk, her notebook balanced upon a silver tray with characteristic efficiency. Her coral beads, now numbering 24 rather than the original 25, caught the lamplight as she prepared to record the evening's proceedings with the same professional precision that had marked her service throughout the investigation. Inspector Japp took his position with the grim satisfaction of a policeman who had witnessed the methodical destruction of what initially appeared to be a perfect crime. His weathered features showed the strain of an investigation that had challenged every assumption about motive, method, and opportunity, transforming a simple theft into something far more complex and infinitely more dangerous. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began with courtly precision, his compact figure immaculate in evening dress, his magnificent mustaches waxed to compass needle points. "We gather this evening to conclude an affair that has revealed far more about human nature than a simple theft might suggest. The last bracelet of the Duchess of Florence has vanished, but in its absence, it has illuminated secrets that someone was prepared to kill to protect." He moved to the empty display case, his hands clasped behind his back as he contemplated the velvet cushion that bore only the faint impression of vanished treasure. "This case has presented us with multiple deceptions, each more sophisticated than the last. A genuine antique replaced by an excellent copy. false evidence planted to misdirect our investigation, and finally, violence employed to silence a witness whose knowledge threatened to expose the entire elaborate construction. The psychological pressure in the room became almost tangible as each suspect felt the weight of Poirot's analysis. The detective's green eyes swept the assembled company with the methodical precision of a master craftsman examining his work. "Let us begin with the bracelet itself," Poirot continued, producing a photograph from his waistcoat pocket. Dr. Moretti's authentication revealed what he was initially reluctant to emphasize, that while 6 of the 7 sapphires were excellent paste, the 7th stone, representing the Palatine Hill, was genuine cashmere sapphire of museum quality. This single stone possessed sufficient value to justify elaborate planning and desperate measures. Mrs. Bloom leaned forward with sharp interest, her earlier enthusiasm now tempered by genuine apprehension. "You're suggesting the entire theft was orchestrated to obtain one genuine stone hidden within a paste reproduction?" "Précisément, madame. But the psychology goes deeper. Who possessed the intimate knowledge necessary to understand this deception? Who knew that Lady Isabel had retained one authentic element from the original bracelet, reset into the copy to preserve something real within the necessary illusion?" The silence stretched like a held breath as the implications settled upon the assembled company. Miss Armitage's pencil had ceased its methodical notation, hovering motionless above the cream-colored paper of her notebook. "The answer," Poirot announced with quiet authority, "lies not in the obvious suspects with their obvious motives, but in the person who arranged every detail of this evening's events. Someone with access to every household secret, every financial arrangement, every security protocol. Someone whose position made them invisible while granting them unprecedented access to information and opportunity." He turned his attention to the technical aspects of the crime, his voice taking on the precise cadence of a master craftsman explaining his art. The method was ingenious in its simplicity. The crystal dome was not forced or bypassed. It was manipulated with professional skill. Beneath the velvet drape of the dais lies a service access panel, secured by 4 recessed screws accessible only to one who knows their location. These screws, when handled with chamois leather and jeweler's rouge, leave no trace of tampering. Poirot demonstrated with delicate precision, lifting the velvet to reveal the brass fittings that had remained hidden throughout the investigation. A slight adjustment to the internal mechanism created just enough clearance for the dome to be lifted a fraction, far enough for skilled hands to break the vacuum seal and remove the bracelet without disturbing the theatrical display above. The revelation struck the assembled company with the force of physical impact. The impossibility of the theft had been transformed into elegant simplicity through the application of professional knowledge and meticulous planning. "But how," demanded Captain March, his voice tight with strain, "could anyone work beneath that case with a room full of witnesses?" "Ah, mon capitaine, that brings us to the most sophisticated element of our criminal's planning. The theft was not accomplished during the evening's festivities. It occurred earlier, during the careful preparation phase, when such access would be both natural and unobserved." Poirot's eyes found Miss Armitage with the gentle courtesy of a man addressing a respected colleague. The bracelet was removed during the afternoon setup, replaced temporarily with a weighted substitute to maintain the proper appearance. A fine black silk thread, sacrificed from a coral necklace, was attached to the genuine piece and threaded through a minute gap between the base and the display platform. At the crucial moment, a simple tug drew the bracelet into the concealed space beneath the dais, leaving only the impression upon the velvet cushion. Miss Armitage's composure cracked like ice under sudden pressure. The efficient secretary, who had managed every aspect of the evening's arrangements, who had recorded every detail of the investigation with professional precision, suddenly revealed the calculating intelligence that had orchestrated the entire elaborate deception. The technique required intimate knowledge of jewelry work, security systems, and criminal psychology. Poirot continued with genuine admiration for the criminal artistry involved. You possessed all three, Mademoiselle Armitage, having spent years managing Lady Isabel's collection and correspondence with dealers, authenticators, and insurance assessors. The physical evidence had accumulated with inexorable precision. The jeweller's rouge upon the red drawing-room mantelpiece, where the genuine sapphire was carefully removed from its setting. The professional tools hidden in the cloak cabinet, revealing expertise that extended far beyond secretarial duties. The left-handed filing marks on the duplicate key, matched by your natural writing style before you attempted to conceal your dominant hand. Her coral necklace, hastily re-knotted after sacrificing one bead to create the silk filament, seemed to tighten around her throat as the truth emerged. The bandage on her left forefinger, supposedly from a paper cut, showed the telltale staining of jeweler's rouge where it had seeped through the fabric. The seventh sapphire, Poirot announced with quiet triumph, moving toward the red drawing-room, currently rests within the hollow brass curtain rod, wrapped in brown paper and positioned where only intimate knowledge of the house's construction would suggest concealment. With ceremonial precision, Inspector Japp accompanied Poirot to retrieve the evidence. The brass rod yielded its secret with the soft whisper of paper against metal, and there, wrapped in brown tissue and nestled within its chamois cloth, lay the genuine sapphire. The stone caught the lamplight and threw it back in brilliant blue fire, its cashmere clarity and depth making the paste stones of the copy seem like colored glass by comparison. The planning was masterful, Poirot observed as they returned to the ballroom, the recovered sapphire resting in his palm like a captured star. Create an elaborate theft with multiple suspects and obvious motives. Plant false evidence to misdirect the investigation toward the most convenient scapegoat. Position yourself as the helpful secretary, recording every detail above suspicion by virtue of your very visibility and indispensability. Miss Armitage's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled to reveal the desperate woman beneath. Years of genteel poverty, of managing other people's wealth while possessing none herself, had created the motive. Her professional skills and intimate knowledge had provided the means. The evening's elaborate social gathering had offered the perfect opportunity. As the evidence mounted with mathematical precision, the true sophistication of the crime became clear. This was not opportunistic theft, but criminal artistry of the highest order, executed by someone who understood not merely the mechanics of stealing, but the psychology of investigation itself. The attack upon Dr. Moretti was your final, desperate gamble, Poirot concluded with gentle finality. He had begun to suspect deeper deceptions than mere forgery. His expertise threatened to expose not merely the paste stones, but the sophisticated technique required to remove and reset the genuine sapphire. You silenced him to protect your secret, but in doing so, you revealed the desperation that lay beneath your careful planning. The psychological chess match had reached its inevitable conclusion. The net had closed with the precision of Poirot's methodical mind, and Miss Celia Armitage stood exposed as the architect of one of the most sophisticated deceptions in criminal history. Inspector Japp stepped forward with official gravity, but Miss Armitage's response revealed the final dignity of a master criminal brought to bay. "You have constructed an elegant case, Monsieur Poirot," she said with remarkable composure, her professional demeanor intact despite the complete exposure of her guilt. "I confess myself impressed by your methods, even as I find myself their victim." As the handcuffs closed around her wrists with metallic finality, she looked once more at the genuine sapphire in Poirot's palm. "It truly is beautiful," she observed, with the detached appreciation of a connoisseur. "Worth everything it cost, and everything it has cost me." The game was concluded, and justice waited to claim its due with all the dignity and precision that marked the greatest detective of his age. The affair of the last bracelet of the Duchess of Florence had reached its penultimate moment, with only the final philosophical reflection remaining to complete the classic Christie structure. Truth had triumphed over deception, and the shadows that had haunted Renfield House were about to be dispelled by the merciless light of complete exposure. The most sophisticated criminal mind had been matched by an even more sophisticated investigation, and Hercule Poirot's little grey cells had once again proven that no deception, however elaborate, could withstand the inexorable logic of methodical detection. The silence that followed Poirot's methodical exposure of Miss Celia Armitage stretched through the ballroom of Renfield House like the held breath before a storm breaks. The elegant chamber, which had witnessed such glittering society only days before, now served as a theatre for the final act of justice, where the carefully constructed facades of London's finest had been stripped away by the relentless logic of the world's greatest detective. Miss Armitage stood by her writing desk with remarkable composure, though the careful observer might have noted the slight tremor in her left hand as she set down her pencil for the final time. Her coral beads, now numbering 24 rather than 25, caught the morning light as her breathing quickened, the only outward sign that the elaborate construction of her deception was finally crumbling under the weight of inexorable truth. "Mademoiselle," Poirot continued with gentle precision, his voice carrying the authority of complete certainty, "permit me to demonstrate how your masterpiece of deception revealed itself through the very perfection of its construction. You have presented us with criminal artistry of the highest order, yet even the most sophisticated mind cannot account for every variable when the little grey cells apply themselves with proper method." The systematic dismantling of her carefully woven alibi proceeded with mathematical precision. You recounted your movements with meticulous detail, telephone calls at 7:35, musicians positioned at 7:45, place cards corrected at 8:05, the red drawing room secured at 8:10, spare programs retrieved at 8:20, each action meticulously documented, each designed to appear both innocent and indispensable. Poirot moved to the evidence table where Inspector Japp had arranged the damning artifacts of her crime. Yet within this precise narrative lay the seeds of your undoing. The matches you claimed had gone astray. A small detail, easily overlooked but highly revealing. For you possess professional-grade matches of the type used by jewelers, precisely what was needed for your delicate work with the genuine sapphire. The physical evidence accumulated with devastating precision. The bandage on your left forefinger, supposedly from a paper cut, showed traces of jeweler's rouge under magnification, the same rouge we discovered on the red drawing-room mantelpiece, where you carefully removed the genuine cashmere sapphire from its Renaissance setting. Your coral necklace, originally 25 beads, now numbers 24, one sacrificed to create the silk filament that enabled your impossible theft. Miss Armitage's professional composure finally cracked, revealing the desperate woman beneath years of efficient service. "You cannot understand, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet cutting through the charged silence. 23 years I managed their treasures, watched fortunes pass through my hands, while my own circumstances remained forever modest. That sapphire represented more than monetary value. It was my single opportunity to claim something for myself. The confession, when it came fully, revealed the sophisticated psychology that had driven her to such elaborate criminality. The theft was never about the worthless copy or the cancelled insurance. It was always about the one genuine stone, Lady Isabel's last connection to her heritage, hidden within the paste reproduction. I knew its value, its history, its significance. I had arranged its authentication, managed its security, supervised every detail of its care. Poirot nodded with the gravity of a confessor receiving absolution. The method was indeed ingenious in its simplicity. During the afternoon preparation, when your access would appear natural and unremarkable, you manipulated the display case's internal mechanism, creating just enough clearance for the dome to be lifted fractionally. The silk thread, attached to the genuine sapphire and threaded through the minute gap between base and platform, allowed you to draw the stone into the concealed space beneath the dais at the crucial moment. The attack upon Dr. Moretti represented the final, desperate gamble. He had begun to suspect deeper irregularities than mere forgery. The gold work modifications necessary to remove and reset the genuine stone threatened to expose your entire scheme. You silenced him not from malice, but from the desperation of someone whose carefully constructed life depended upon maintaining certain deceptions. Inspector Japp stepped forward with official gravity, the handcuffs gleaming in the morning light. Miss Armitage offered no resistance, her dignity intact despite the complete exposure of her guilt. "You have constructed an elegant case, Monsieur Poirot," she acknowledged with remarkable composure. "I confess myself impressed by your methods, even as I find myself their victim." As the formal procedures concluded and Miss Armitage was prepared for transport to the magistrate, Lady Isabel demonstrated the grace that marked true aristocracy. Inspector Japp, given Miss Armitage's years of faithful service and the fact that she stole only a worthless reproduction while the genuine stone has been recovered, perhaps the magistrate might view this as a momentary lapse in judgment rather than habitual criminality. The morning brought resolution for all the evening's participants. Mrs. Dorothy Bloom, her American pragmatism asserting itself, negotiated the purchase of the genuine sapphire at a figure that would restore the Renfield family's financial stability. The Contessa Bianca Ricci, her claims to Florentine heritage acknowledged, arranged for the stone's eventual return to Italy through proper diplomatic channels, ensuring both justice and dignity in the transaction. Captain March, his innocence established and his military honor restored, departed with visible relief, though not without a final acknowledgment of how close he had come to serious trouble. "Point taken, Monsieur Poirot," he said with genuine humility. "When a gentleman acts as errand boy for less scrupulous parties, he must expect to be mistaken for the parcel." Dr. Moretti, pale but determined despite his recent ordeal, provided the final authentication details that completed the case. The irregularities I noted were evidence of recent modification. The careful removal and resetting of the genuine sapphire required techniques that necessarily differed from the original Renaissance craftsmanship. I should have been more insistent about my concerns. As the various participants departed Renfield House to resume their interrupted lives, the elegant mansion seemed to exhale with relief. The shadows had been dispelled, the truth revealed, and justice served with all the precision and dignity that marked the greatest detective of his age. Hercule Poirot stood for a final moment before the empty crystal dome, his compact figure perfectly groomed despite the morning's exertions, his magnificent mustaches waxed to compass needle precision. The case had concluded with the mathematical certainty that characterized all his investigations, yet it had revealed truths about human nature that extended far beyond mere criminality. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured as we prepared to depart, "how the pursuit of beauty, or perhaps the security that beauty can provide, can lead even the most refined individuals to compromise their principles. Miss Armitage was not a common criminal, but a woman of genuine sophistication, driven to desperate acts by the mathematics of genteel poverty." The philosophical implications of the case occupied his thoughts as we walked through the marble corridors one final time. "Consider the psychology, mon ami. She possessed every skill necessary for legitimate success. Intelligence, organization, technical expertise, profound understanding of valuable objects. Yet circumstances trapped her in a position where these abilities could only serve others' prosperity, never her own." As our cab pulled away from Belgrave Square, Poirot settled back with the satisfaction of a craftsman whose work had achieved its intended perfection. The little grey cells have once again demonstrated that no deception, however sophisticated, can withstand the patient application of logic, observation, and method. Order has been restored. Truth has triumphed over illusion, and justice has been served with appropriate consideration for human frailty. The last bracelet of the Duchess of Florence had vanished, but in its absence, It had illuminated the complex psychology of crime and the inexorable power of methodical detection. Miss Celia Armitage had created a masterpiece of deception, but she had encountered a master of revelation whose little grey cells could unravel even the most elaborate criminal artistry. "And the lesson, Hastings?" Poirot asked with that characteristic smile that indicated complete satisfaction with the morning's work. "That truth, like morning light, must inevitably penetrate even the darkest corners of human deception," I replied, having learned something of his methods over our years of association. "Précisément, mon ami. Also, never trust a display case that depends upon suction, a secretary who loses a bead, or a party that begins with lilies." His eyes twinkled with gentle humor. "Always funerary flowers, you understand. They make the crime feel welcome." As London's familiar streets rolled past our window, the affair of the last bracelet of the Duchess of Florence joined that collection of cases where Hercule Poirot had demonstrated that intellectual arrogance, however sophisticated, offered no protection against the relentless pursuit of truth. The game was concluded, order was restored, and somewhere in the distance, justice waited to claim its due with all the dignity and precision that marked the world's greatest detective. The shadows of Renfield House were behind us now, and ahead lay London's endless supply of mysteries requiring the attention of the little grey cells. But this case would remain in memory as a perfect example of how even the most elaborate criminal construction must eventually yield to the inexorable logic of methodical investigation, and how truth, patient and persistent, must always triumph in the end. The metallic click of handcuffs securing Miss Celia Armitage's wrists echoed through the silent ballroom of Renfield House with chilling finality, marking the conclusion of one of the most sophisticated deceptions in criminal history. She offered no resistance, her dignity intact despite the complete exposure of her elaborate crime, walking with measured steps toward the justice that awaited her with the same professional composure that had characterized her years of faithful service. The immediate aftermath revealed the profound impact of her betrayal upon all who had trusted her. Lady Isabel watched her longtime companion's departure with a complex mixture of relief and profound sorrow, understanding that the recovery of the genuine sapphire could never fully restore the sense of security that had been shattered by such intimate deception. The elegant ballroom, which had witnessed such glittering society only days before, now seemed haunted by the shadows of secrets that had festered within its marble walls. Inspector Japp's practical mind focused on the legal proceedings ahead. "She'll face serious charges," he observed with the weary satisfaction of a policeman who had witnessed the unraveling of criminal artistry. "Theft, assault, conspiracy to defraud. The magistrate won't look kindly on such elaborate deception, regardless of her previous character." Yet Hercule Poirot's keen psychological insight penetrated deeper than mere legal consequences. "Consider, mes amis," he said with characteristic precision, "the tragedy of talents corrupted by circumstance. Miss Armitage possessed every skill necessary for legitimate success: intelligence, organization, technical expertise, profound understanding of valuable objects. Yet society's rigid structure trapped her in a position where these abilities could only serve others' prosperity, never her own." His analysis revealed the bitter irony at the heart of the case. For 23 years, she had managed treasures worth fortunes while her own circumstances remained forever modest, watching wealth pass through her hands like water while her personal security depended entirely upon others' continued satisfaction with her service. The resolution provided appropriate closure for all the evening's participants. Mrs. Dorothy Bloom, her American pragmatism asserting itself, negotiated the purchase of the genuine sapphire at a figure that would restore the Renfield family's financial stability while satisfying her collector's requirements. Captain March, his innocence established and his military honor restored, departed with visible relief, though not without acknowledging how close he had come to serious trouble through his association with questionable parties. Dr. Moretti, pale but determined despite his recent ordeal, provided the final authentication details that completed the case. His scholarly precision had ultimately proved crucial in exposing the sophisticated techniques required to remove and reset the genuine cashmere sapphire, though he bore the physical scars of Miss Armitage's desperate attempt to silence his expertise. The Contessa Bianca Ricci's diplomatic arrangements promised the most elegant resolution of all. Through proper channels, she had negotiated the sapphire's eventual return to Florence, ensuring that historical justice would be served alongside legal justice. The genuine stone would find its way back to Italy, carrying with it the complex legacy of the woman who had loved it enough to risk everything for its possession. 3 months later, Poirot and I found ourselves in Florence, witnessing the ceremonial placement of the recovered sapphire in the Bargello Museum's Renaissance collection. The ancient city received us with its characteristic serenity, terracotta domes against Tuscan blue, the Arno sliding like polished silk under pale bridges, and the lily of Florence carved in stone at every turn. The ceremony was intimate, rather than public, conducted in a vaulted chamber where cool stone carried the faint scent of beeswax and centuries. The Contessa greeted us with composed warmth, while Mrs. Bloom represented the American foundation that had facilitated the stone's repatriation. Dr. Moretti, fully recovered and restored to his scholarly confidence, supervised the sapphire's placement in its new setting, openly modern but in dialogue with Renaissance traditions. "Truth must not pretend to be a lie," he explained as he positioned the stone within its contemporary mount. "A copy that acknowledges its nature may be admired without deceit, but truth forced to wear the mask of deception becomes an invitation to crime." The sapphire blazed with its characteristic cashmere fire, seeming somehow larger and more significant now that it rested where it belonged. Stripped of all the narratives of theft and recovery, the stone had grown in stature, carrying with it the weight of its complex history and the human drama that had surrounded its brief exile. During our stay in Florence, Poirot made an unexpected confession. "I visited Miss Armitage before our departure," he revealed as we sat in a cafe near the Ponte Santa Trinita. "Holloway Prison. There remains in her the pride of the craftsperson who has been told all her life that her skill is service, not authorship. She regrets the violence against Dr. Moretti, truly regrets it, but she spoke of the sapphire with the passion of an artist describing a masterpiece." His psychological insight penetrated to the heart of her criminal motivation. It was not greed that drove her, Hastings, but the hunger to be the one who decides. Many crimes are born not of avarice, but of that small monarchy we wish to establish over our own circumstances. She saw in that stone her single opportunity to claim agency over her destiny. The philosophical implications extended beyond individual psychology to broader questions about society and justice. Miss Armitage's crime had emerged from fundamental inequalities that placed valuable objects within reach of those who could never hope to own them legitimately, creating the psychological pressure that ultimately corrupted her considerable talents. As the Florentine bells marked the evening hour with resonant certainty, Poirot delivered his final reflection on the case. "The little grey cells have once again demonstrated that no deception, however sophisticated, can withstand methodical investigation. Yet this victory carries sobering recognition that criminal artistry of such sophistication emerges from profound inequalities in our social arrangements." The last bracelet of the Duchess of Florence had found its way home, but its journey had illuminated uncomfortable truths about trust, class, and the dangerous alchemy that transforms legitimate skills into criminal artistry. The case would be remembered not merely for its monetary value, but for the intellectual audacity of its conception and the chilling psychological depth of its perpetrator. "And the ultimate lesson, mon ami?" Poirot asked as we prepared to leave the ancient city. "That justice must be tempered with understanding of the circumstances that create criminals," I replied, having learned something of his philosophy over our years of association. Précisément, Hastings. The little grey cells solve mysteries, but they cannot solve the deeper mystery of human nature itself. His eyes held the weight of philosophical complexity as he added, "We restore order, we serve justice, but we must also remember that behind every crime lies a human story, sometimes tragic, sometimes merely sordid, but always instructive for those who would understand the infinite complexity of the human heart." As we walked through Florence's ancient streets one final time, the sapphire rested secure in its new home, no longer a symbol of theft and deception, but of justice served and historical wrongs made right. The affair had concluded with characteristic precision, yet its echoes would linger as a reminder that even in the most refined corners of society, the heart can harbor the most profound and dangerous secrets. Order had been restored, truth had triumphed over deception, and the genuine stone had found its rightful place in history. But the questions raised about human nature, social inequality, and the corruption of talent would remain long after the last echoes of the case had faded, testament to the enduring complexity of the human condition that Hercule Poirot had devoted his remarkable career to understanding. The ancient bells of Florence marked the evening hour with resonant certainty as Hercule Poirot stood upon the terrace of our hotel, gazing across the terracotta rooftops toward the distant dome of the cathedral. 3 months had passed since the dramatic conclusion of the affair at Renfield House, and the genuine cashmere sapphire now rested securely in its new home at the Bargello Museum, no longer a symbol of theft and deception, but of justice served and historical wrongs made right. The Morning Post had brought the final correspondence that would complete the case's complex resolution. Miss Celia Armitage's letter, written from Holloway Prison in her characteristic precise penmanship, carried the dignity of a woman who refused to be diminished by her circumstances. She did not plead or excuse, but thanked Poirot for the manner of his revelation, conducted with professional respect despite the devastating effectiveness of his methods. "She asks particularly," Poirot observed as he folded the letter with characteristic care, "whether Dr. Moretti would accept a formal apology through proper channels. The assault," she writes, "was the one act she cannot reconcile with her own understanding of herself. The theft was calculation, but the violence was a descent into something that stained her view of her own craftsmanship." His green eyes held that particular mixture of satisfaction and melancholy that marked the conclusion of cases involving sophisticated criminals brought low by human frailty. "There is great pride in this woman, Hastings. Pride and, at last, a moral clarity about the thing that cannot be polished away like tarnish from silver." The legal proceedings had concluded with appropriate gravity. Inspector Japp's telegram reported that the judge, noting a crime of considerable intellect and lamentable necessity, had imposed a sentence that, while not light, carried recommendations for early consideration, should her conduct prove exemplary. Dr. Moretti himself had spoken on her behalf, his scholarly integrity compelling him to acknowledge both her professional skills and the market pressures that had corrupted them. The Italian professor's own transformation provided perhaps the most hopeful outcome of the entire affair. His recovery had been accompanied by a new mission, a series of public lectures on ethics in authentication, the responsibilities of expertise, and the duty owed to original craftsmen. "If we demand truth from objects," he had written, "we must practice truth in our dealings with them." Lady Isabel's correspondence revealed the restoration of both financial stability and moral equilibrium. Mrs. Bloom's consortium had purchased the genuine sapphire at a figure that eliminated the family's immediate pressures, while the Contessa's diplomatic arrangements ensured the stone's eventual return to Florence through proper channels. Most significantly, Lady Isabel had established a modest fund to assist Miss Armitage's legal defense, recognizing that 23 years of faithful service deserved consideration alongside the crime that had concluded it. She was driven to desperate acts by circumstances that might have tested anyone, the letter concluded with aristocratic grace. "Justice must be served, but it need not be merciless. Captain March had departed London with his military honor restored, but his perspective permanently altered by his narrow escape from false accusation. His association with questionable parties had taught him valuable lessons about the importance of understanding one's associates and their true motivations. Mrs. Bloom, ever practical, had returned to New York, where her foundation now funded a bursary for training conservators from modest backgrounds with excellent hands, a legacy that would honor skill regardless of social position. As we prepared for our own departure from Florence, Poirot delivered his final philosophical reflection on the case. "Consider the psychology, mon ami," he said, his compact figure perfectly groomed despite the emotional weight of our discussions. Miss Armitage possessed every skill necessary for legitimate success: intelligence, organization, technical expertise, profound understanding of valuable objects. Yet society's rigid structure trapped her in a position where these abilities could only serve others' prosperity, never her own. He paused, allowing his words to settle like morning mist revealing hidden landscapes. The genuine tragedy lies not in the theft itself, but in the waste of such remarkable talents. She understood metals, glass, security systems, and human psychology with the precision of a master craftsman. In different circumstances, she might have been celebrated as an expert in her own right, rather than remaining forever the efficient assistant to others' achievements. The symbolic significance of her crime had not escaped Poirot's analytical mind. By taking the genuine stone and leaving the copy, she performed an act of profound meaning. She proved that she, the invisible secretary, understood the true value and history of the object more intimately than those who possessed it merely by birthright. It was rebellion disguised as theft, the assertion of intellectual ownership over material possession. The violence against Dr. Moretti represented the single flaw in her otherwise masterful construction, the moment when desperate fear overcame careful planning. Even the most ordered mind, Poirot observed, can be driven to disorder when its very existence is threatened. That impulsive act, that moment of human frailty, created the crack through which the little gray cells could enter and unravel the entire design. As our train pulled away from Florence's ancient station, Poirot settled into his compartment with the satisfaction of a craftsman whose work had achieved its intended perfection. The case had concluded with mathematical precision, yet its implications would resonate far beyond the immediate satisfaction of justice served. The questions it raised about human nature, social inequality, and the corruption of legitimate talent would endure as testament to the complex psychology that drives even the most refined individuals to desperate acts. The little gray cells have once again demonstrated their reliability, he reflected as the Tuscan countryside rolled past our window. No deception, however sophisticated, can withstand the patient application of logic, observation, and method. Yet this victory carries sobering recognition that criminal artistry of such sophistication emerges from profound inequalities in our social arrangements. In my coat pocket rested a small package, a single coral bead no longer threaded, with a mere breath of black silk still caught through its heart. I had found it wedged beneath a skirting board in the red drawing-room and had posted it, wrapped in tissue with no note enclosed, to Holloway Prison. When I had shown it to Poirot before posting, he had watched me with curiosity that warmed into approval. "You have learned, perhaps," he had said, "that there are symbols as there are facts. That bead represents two truths. It was an instrument of crime and a fragment of self. In returning it, you acknowledge both the guilt and the humanity." As London's familiar spires appeared through the evening mist, Poirot delivered his final observation on the affair. "Remember, Hastings, the most dangerous theft is not of jewels, but of meanings. Guard against the small rearrangements by which a person convinces themselves that wrong is a version of right. And if you must accept lilies at a party, keep your eye upon the bracelets." He laughed then, very softly, and I laughed too. For order, which had been disturbed, was restored. Truth had triumphed over deception, and justice had been served with all the precision and dignity that marked the world's greatest detective. The last bracelet of the Duchess of Florence had found its rightful place in history, but its brief exile had illuminated uncomfortable truths about trust, class, and the dangerous alchemy that transforms legitimate skills into criminal artistry. The case would be remembered not merely for its monetary value or technical sophistication, but for the profound questions it raised about the human condition itself. "And so we conclude another chapter," Poirot said as our cab approached his familiar lodgings. His magnificent mustaches waxed to compass needle precision despite the journey's fatigue. "The truth has triumphed, order has been restored. And somewhere in London's endless maze of secrets, another mystery awaits the attention of the little grey cells." The door closed behind us with quiet finality, marking the end of an affair that had begun with glittering society and concluded with philosophical reflection on the infinite complexity of the human heart. In the distance, Big Ben chimed the hour with its eternal authority, marking time's passage over a city where secrets flourished in shadows, but could never long withstand the patient pursuit of truth by those possessed of sufficient method, logic, and understanding. The case was closed, but its lessons would endure, testament to the enduring power of methodical investigation and the ultimate triumph of truth over even the most sophisticated deceptions that the human mind could devise. For in the end, as Hercule Poirot had demonstrated once again, no criminal artistry, however elaborate, could withstand the inexorable logic of the little grey cells applied with proper patience, precision, and profound understanding of human nature in all its tragic complexity.